Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Review Saturday Conversation Show, an interview series where I talk to entertainment personalities, content creators, and filmmakers about their work and love of film. Today's guest is David Gregory, director of numerous acclaimed documentaries such as Lost Souls, The Doomed Journey of Richard Stanley's Island of Dr. Moreau, and Enter the Clones of Bruce, as well as the co-founder of Severin Films, an independent film production and distribution company that is devoted to rescuing, restoring, and releasing the most controversial and provocative films from around the world. An advocate for exploitation cinema and also an advocate for physical media, David Gregory has long brought together his passion for film and his great business acumen to create the great kind of enterprise of Severin Films that is available to us today. I want to say, David, thank you so very much for your time today, and how are you?
I'm great, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Oh, well, it's a pleasure to talk to you, and I've been doing a deep dive just into your career and your life and such, and always ask the question about first exposure to movies as when you were a child. And from what I understand, in your case, especially when it comes to horror cinema, it's around 11, 12 years old, right? Where you and your mates will get together and watch all different types of horror films on the VHS players that will be in your family's homes. Is that pretty much where your passion for horror films kind of came from around that time period?
No, it actually started earlier than that. It was
Hmm.
when my parents took me to see the 1976 King Kong at the cinema, and that was really the changer for me. And I was like 4 years old, and was just mind blowing. And from then on, I was just obsessed with monsters and horror and anything like that. Never had an interest particularly in sport or cars or, typical boy pursuits, but
Hmm.
horror was everything to me. So yeah, when video came around though, that's when my knowledge became a lot more encyclopedic, we could say, because that's obviously when so much more became available. Before that, I was reliant on what would play on the BBC or ITV channels on the three channels we had at that time, actually. And I had the Dennis Gifford horror movies book and the Alan Frank books that were kind of that they were just so important to horror fans of that era in England in particular, because that's how we saw the imagery, at least through all the pictures they had in those books. Even if we couldn't see the films, we were able to see just how vast and wide the horror genre was in cinema.
Is it true that a lot of households in the UK, Britain in particular, had VHS players because of the royal wedding with Charles and Diana came out on VHS, and so every house was like, "We got to get a player because we must watch this every day or so." Is that pretty much how that all started?
Sort of, yeah. I mean, basically, that was an event that led to a lot of people buying their first VCR, but it was to tape it off the telly. It wasn't to actually rent it, and that was, I think, why my parents got one so early. And I'm sure there were other factors as well, but that was one of the reasons that made the UK one of the fastest growing countries to have a VCR in, pretty much every household.
Hmm.
And yeah, and so the video shop kind of they just started popping up everywhere after that.
So I'm an 80s kid, and I'm so fortunate to have an older brother that was like he's 9 years older than me. And he had a video card. You go to the local, video place wherever it may be, and he will get all these great movies, action films. I grew up on a steady diet of Schwarzeneggers and Stallones and Nightmare on Elm Street films, etc. That's kind of like my exposure to all of that stuff. I had him as my access, and we had the VHS player and everything. How did you and your mates, get access to these horror films? Because some of the horror films you were watching when you were young was like films like The Beyond and other things like that. How do you get your hands on titles like that at such a young age?
Well, there were quite a lot of video shops because when video first came in England, it wasn't subject to the same rating laws that cinema had. So you didn't have to have a film go through the BBFC and get a rating for the
Hmm.
first few years of the business. So therefore, all kinds of stuff was just hitting video without a rating. And now a lot of them would put their own rating on the cover, even if it wasn't an official BBFC rating, or it would be the BBFC X certificate version, like the Beyond, which is cut to shit. But
Mm,
was for me at 9 or 10 years old, still seemed pretty gory and exciting. Um, but the problem was that soon became a scandal in England because children were able to watch these films without somebody at the cinema saying, "No, you're not old enough."
hmm.
The video shop owner often didn't really care, or didn't even know. They weren't really educated on what kind of films were suitable. Like I have Werewolf Woman behind me here, which is quite a nudity heavy horror film. And I remember renting that when I was probably about 10 or 11 years old, and actually uh, owning up to my dad that I was like, this is definitely more of a sex film than it is a horror. But because I was, adamant that horror films weren't dangerous to somebody like me who
Mm.
loved horror films. I knew that they were films. I knew that they weren't something that, oh, maybe I'll try that in real life, which was always kind of the propaganda that they tried to spread in the media about showing these things. And so I had that. Like my dad was pretty lenient as far as which films. I mean, he would get an earful from my mum about just renting me horror films. So he had to be wary of that. If my mum was going to be home, then he would have to be a bit more careful. But Carl, my best friend in school, who also is the co-owner of Severin, his dad was lenient as well. So between us, we were able to kind of go to each other's houses on a Saturday and get one of the parents to rent us something. He also had a video shop right by his house, which could actually walk across the road, and that guy did not care,
Mm.
what he rented us. So he was the guy where we got. And Carl also had two videos, so he could go rent stuff from the corner shop across the road, and then tape it, and then we'd watch it, at our leisure when there wasn't a snooping parent around, making sure we weren't up to no good.
Right. When did your filmmaking brain kind of develop? Was it even at that young age? Because you said before you knew what you were watching wasn't dangerous. It was just a film. At that time, were you kind of slowly understanding the concepts of editing, cinematography, makeup, stuff like that as you were watching it? And was that something that made it even more thrilling to watch these things? Because not only watching a story on life and it's something that really kind of caters to your taste, but something that is being created by another person's hand and showed on film. It would have been something that would really been
Absolutely. No,
awesome.
I was always obsessed with the mechanics of what went into making these films. I mean, I think that was something. There's a particular picture in the Dennis Gifford horror movies book of Lon Chaney with his makeup kit
Hmm.
and things like that, and seeing, behind the scenes photos that occasionally they'd have in House of Hammer magazine or something like that. That was fascinating to me because there were no sort of making of films available at that time. I think there was making of Star Wars, and that had played on television, but there wasn't a lot of it. Like you'd see bits and pieces on documentary shows on the BBC of how movies were made, and so that stuff was fascinating to me. I got the Dick Smith makeup sets
Yeah.
that kids. I had that. I never really succeeded in creating them to look like they did on the cover of the box, but I sure as hell tried. And then 8 years old, I made my first Super 8 film with friends, and then I was always making Super 8 films after that. That was the pursuit that I was most interested in doing. If we weren't renting a film from the video shop, it was getting together with friends and making Super 8 films.
So when the video nasties era hits in the UK, and for people who don't know, um, it's this time where the government they had pretty much like a list of titles, right? That was deemed unacceptable, too dangerous for people to watch, and they had their various, a lot of times, kind of concocted psychological kind of tests and studies to release and that stuff. It was kind of very, it lasted probably till around what? late 80s, early 90s? Did it even last
Well,
longer than that?
it was 1983
Right,
when it started being a matter of national news and it started getting talked about in Parliament. And Mary Whitehouse was a campaigner for the morals of the country. She was a very Christian lady who had been working for years about, making sure that there wasn't swearing or anything kind of remotely sexy on television. I think she probably took issue with like Carry On films and Benny Hill and
right,
stuff like that originally. I don't know that for sure, but it was anything that she didn't think was suitable for the family. Everything should have been family friendly. But she got the ear of politicians, and during the Thatcher era, unemployment was an all-time high. The Falklands War was going on. There was a bunch of like real issues going on. All the pits were closing, and there was just general disarray in England. So the idea to actually put the onus on something like videos in the home distracted people from the
right.
fact that society was crumbling due to shitty leadership in Parliament. And they were like, "Hey, we can blame this on video." So basically, yes, they made video nasties, as they were called, the reason for all of society's ills and how society was only going to get worse because of that. And so they would have like gatherings of politicians, Mary Whitehouse, church people. I didn't grow up religious. A lot of people weren't religious in England, but for some reason, church people were involved in making decisions for the rest of the country, for adults in the country. And so basically, yes, there was a list of 72 titles on the Video Nasties list, but this list would change from up and down the country because the police didn't know what
Mm.
was obscene. They were just busting video shops because they were told that there was obscene material in the video shops. So lots of, just regular working people with a video shop became criminals overnight, and they were arrested. And they basically were told that if they didn't plead guilty, then they could face prison sentences, if whatever they were distributing was found obscene. So basically, they were strong armed into admitting their guilt. They got a criminal record, they got a fine, and it put a lot of people out of business and basically made the video business, which had boomed overnight, was very much a way that blue collar people could start a business that actually was very successful very quickly. I think the other thing was that the studios were quite late adopting video because they were worried that if it was something that was available in the home, then
No one
they
watching in the cinemas. Yeah,
money that they could make it on showing it on television and returning it
yeah.
to the cinema. So they were slightly, so that's why so much independent stuff was imported and low budget stuff was imported from overseas by, people who weren't film industry people. And so they were like, what are all these scruffy blue collar people doing, making all the money in the film industry all of a sudden?
Mm.
Let's make what they're doing illegal and make them criminals. And so that was kind of a way. But in 1985, they introduced something called the Video Recordings Act, which made it such that every single film that came out on home video had to have a BBFC rating. So they gave the BBFC a monopoly, the government approved monopoly, and BBFC just started making up their own rules about what they thought was dangerous and whatnot, just to show. And to this day, they're still a complete bunch of it's a complete bunch of nonsense that they spout with absolutely no scientific backing as far as like what should and shouldn't be allowed. It's just the old school English, we are decent and
Mm.
everybody else is not.
Well, I can see with the way that you're speaking of it, the passion is incredibly, and not only is it evidently you're very passionate about it, but the passion is infectious as well, which I think makes you such a great advocate for this type of cinema and film as
Well,
well.
it
What?
ended up sort of dictating the rest of my life, basically. I
Yeah.
didn't realize it at the time, but it was something, it was the very early on. I was like, I became, for this on this particular subject, I became an advocate because
Mm.
I was basically realized very early on that the media, politicians, the church, they're all fucking liars and
Mm.
they'll whatever makes sells newspapers or gets them voted in or all these kinds of things because the average person, they didn't particularly care about whether or not zombie flesh eaters was available uncut. They were like, if they were told that it was dangerous, then they're like, oh sure, let's get rid of it.
And Was that the moment where you been, I imagine around that time, maybe you've been 12, maybe going to 13 or so when this was happening. Was that the moment when you being exposed to that kind of censorship, the advocate in you was really born? We had the film fan, we have the person who wanted to filmmaker, but now you have this other part of your personality, of yourself, which is the advocate, because you're seeing the game, you're seeing the wires, you're seeing the marionette kind of playing, you know what's going on. And to me, I think it shows a real great kind of foresight for you as such a young man to be able to see that kind of thing happening and not only not toe the line going with everyone else is doing, which if you're I'm a horror fan and I'm a heavy metal fan and I'm a Christian. I'm all three. So I fight against three like by fronts, right? And the whole part of I love about being all of them is that I'm just trying to be who I am because that's what I like.
Yeah,
And I don't care what
they
everyone
don't
else is
have to be
doing.
they don't have to be mutually
Yeah,
exclusive. It's
exclusive, exactly. Yeah,
it's the way people twist, they use these things to basically
exactly.
behind in order to inflict their moral rules onto the rest of society, which should be none
Yeah.
of their, and so basically, heavy metal was not an issue in England like it was in America.
Mm,
It's funny, like my mum was very keen for me to pursue my heavy metal interest when I was like 13 and 14 because it would take my mind off horror films. But
yeah.
it didn't work, but that was that. But yes, no, that's it wasn't just me who was doing that. Obviously, it was very hard to find people in Nottingham where I grew up outside of Carl who were as passionate as we were about being able to see these films. And we started collecting them. Like a lot of the films you see behind you are that collection from my teenage years because they were
Mm,
taken off the shelves. They all became illegal. All these tapes were illegal. Even children's films were illegal if they didn't have the BBFC rating on them. So therefore, all of them were taken off the shelves and put in the back or put in the garage of the video shop owner. So that we were able to go to them and say, "Have you got any tapes?" And it's funny now that people we were like 14 years old and they were like, "Sure, come and get some of these banned tapes from us for £5 or whatever." But they did because those things were just collecting dust, and they were probably like, "It's just they're obviously passionate about it. Go for it." But it was at that point that fanzines like Sam Hain came out, and there were a lot of photocopied fanzines in England at the time because we all wanted to discuss this with like-minded people, but there weren't that
yeah.
many people in our area, and there wasn't the internet, so you couldn't, go into chat rooms. That was the way we communicated, and that was also the way we were able to swap tapes with each other and sell tapes that we'd found. Like if I'd got two copies of a Night of the Demon, for example, I'd sell one of them or exchange it for a tape that somebody else had. So that was kind of the early days of actually distributing these films, which was very much illegal. If I actually was caught at 14 years old, sending a tape to somebody else somewhere else in England using the Royal Mail, that was a very arrestable offence.
I can just imagine, like a 13-year-old David Gregory on the street corner with a trench jacket, just open like, got a Mario Barber here, Mario Barber, Lucio Fulci
I
over here.
did.
Oh, there's some.
Most people weren't interested. Like I would
Yeah,
take them to school and be like, "I've got a copy of Blood Feast. This film's banned,"
yeah,
and I had to pay 15 quid for a bootleg of it. Will you rent it from me for 50p? And if I have 30 people who'll do that, I've made my money back. But people just weren't interested. They'd rather watch, the latest blockbusters, and I get that they're not going to be into Blood Feast the same way I was, as
yeah,
I learned that quite quickly.
yeah. I want to move on to this game I like to play with my guests. It's called Choose Between Two. Essentially, I'm going to give you choices between two. You're going to choose one, and you're just going to elaborate on it. Are you ready to play, David?
I am.
All right. Number one, Stuart Gordon or David Cronenberg?
David Cronenberg.
Ah, interesting. Very cool. Very cool. Mario Bava or Lucio Fulci?
Fulci.
Ah, again, another interesting one. This one I usually I had to tweak this one for you because usually the question is physical media or streaming, and I know you're going to say physical media, so I'm going to change this up a bit. Which one is more enjoyable for you? Being in going back to the days of being in a video store and scrounging around and looking for different titles and such, or going on a streaming site and going around looking for titles there? Which one was always
Video
more
store,
smoother?
hands down. I mean, even like particularly those early days before the video recordings that came in, those are some of the happiest experiences of my childhood, was going into that store and just picking up the covers and looking, because so many of them were not in the Dennis Gifford book and the
Hmm.
House of Hammer magazine. It was like, bloody moon, what is this? And then there's all the gory pictures on the back. I have to see this. So there was, you just realized that there were so many more movies out there than even were covered in those encyclopedias and horror books that were out there. So yeah, those video shops were amazing. I can still remember the smell of the first video shop I went to, probably 9 years old.
I loved going to the video store. Again, the smells because they have like kind of like they sell their own kind of confectionery kind of stuff that you can take at home or what have you. But
Yeah.
also, I just really liked just looking around and looking at the different covers of stuff, and you can pick it up and you just flip it around and you read the back and everything. And yeah, I really admire this. Do you think there can ever be a chance that maybe in the future, maybe even the present day, that like there could be a pop-up video store that pops up somewhere and
Yeah,
someone
it
does something
happens,
like
but
that?
I think it's more to browse than to actually
Right,
rent films. I don't.
right.
I mean, there's one here in LA actually, Vidiots, which you can still go in, but it's still DVDs and Blu-rays and
Hmm.
that kind of thing mostly. But yeah, but the smell of Gray's Video in Arnold, the first one that I went to, it wasn't as sophisticated as that. It didn't have a popcorn machine and confectionery. It basically had lots of cigarette smoke and ash all over the place, coupled with like new plastic, because it was
Right.
like the beginning of video. So basically, a lot of the things were fresh out of the factory, so they had a very particular smell.
What I know that the first film that you saw to really open up things for you was cinema, but the choice here is, do you prefer watching things in cinema or watching things at home, whether it be back in the day on VHS or today on DVD, Blu-ray?
Definitely watching them in the cinema, although I watch more things at home now, but I still go to the cinema quite a lot.
And just to finish this off, if when you're at the cinema and you sit down about to watch a movie, what's your go-to, popcorn or candy?
A candy, because popcorn gets stuck in my throat, so it has
Oh.
to be like chocolate raisins or something like that.
Okay, cool. I usually say candy too because I've been to so many screenings that give free popcorn. I don't know, I think popcorn just doesn't. But what I love about those screenings though is when my kids get free popcorn and they think they've hit the mother load. They absolutely love it. So
Yeah, I never used to even get popcorn when we went to the cinema when I was a kid. We had like Kiora Orange, which was kind of a thing where you put the straw in the plastic thing, really cheap, shitty orange.
mhm.
And yeah, I want to say there was like candy bars and stuff, but no, we never got popcorn. They had popcorn machines, but it was just something I didn't particularly like.
The Matt's Movie Reviews YouTube channel is brought to you by TeePublic. TeePublic is the world's largest marketplace for independent creators to sell their work on the highest quality merchandise. With over 1.2 million designs, TeePublic is sure to have something you'll love. I want to talk about how you kind of got into like more of the business side of things. You worked at a place called VPN, is that right? When you were a student, like on weekends and such, it was like a distribution place, and you were just packing boxes for like for shipping out. Is that right?
Right, that was like basically before I went to university. It was while I was still in high school. It was one of the places I went to try and ask them if they had any illegal tapes in the back, and it turns out he was a distributor. He wasn't a video shop. He had a video
Hmm.
shop downstairs, but he actually distributed. Andrew Clark's his name, and I'm still in touch with him. Saw him when I went back to Nottingham at Christmas, and he didn't have what I needed, but he really appreciated how into movies I was.
Hmm.
Like a lot of people in the video industry were not movie people. They were business people. They were turning pieces of plastic into pound coins, was the saying he always used to say. And so he was like, "Oh, maybe I can use you. That maybe I can use you in my business for something or other, right?" And he knew I would have done anything to work in that environment. So he got me to work very, very cheaply. And and initially, yes, I was just packing the boxes to ship tapes around the country. And it was a lot of ex-rental tapes, and when sell-through had come had come out pretty recently. And again, in England, it was one of the first places to actually popularize the actual buying of videotapes as opposed to the renting of videotapes.
Right.
So there was a lot of that stuff that's what they were buying and selling. And so I would package that stuff originally, but very soon they had me on the phones selling to people as well because I could talk about the movies. And so that's what I did with him. And even when I was at university, when I would go back to England for the summer, I would work for him. And then after I graduated, I went back to Nottingham and I worked for him for a few years. And that's when I made my first documentaries because he'd amassed a certain amount of equipment at that point as well.
So it was like such beneficial kind of like work experience that you had there working there with
Absolutely.
Andrew.
I
Yeah.
have no I have no animosity towards Andrew paying me slave wages like he did because it was just it taught me so much. And also I there were situations like somebody would come in with something that was an illegal tape. They didn't realize it, like a House of Wax on Warner
Mm.
Home Video. You know, this is a tape I've one of the first tapes that Warner's ever released. You know, and nobody thought that that would be something you could get arrested for, and you probably wouldn't have got arrested for it, to be honest, because it wasn't something like I Spit on Your Grave or Zombie Flesh Eaters or Faces of Death, but technically was an illegal tape. So I would get that when I was there. But it also allowed me to just take movies home every single night without having to pay a rental fee. And so I would, you know, expanded my film knowledge tenfold.
Um, if there is a young man out there now in the situation that in the position that you were in at that, like you were at that time, could the road to finding a career in the stuff that you do now, is that still the way to go to someone, have some type of mentorship, work somewhere for free or for as an apprentice? Is those opportunities still available these days as compared to was back in when you were younger?
No, because there aren't nearly as many film distributors and video shops. You know, I mean, there's many a story about people working in the video store was kind of their start because that's where they got their film education, you know. And I guess before that it was probably working in a movie theater, but in the
Mm.
case of the video store, you actually got to find out about the transactional part of it as well, and like buying the films, and when the new releases come in, you put them in the new release section and all that kind of stuff. Um, and figuring out like what doesn't rent after a certain amount of time, that kind of thing. But there was also several wholesalers, independent wholesalers, certainly around England at the time, and I would imagine everywhere as well, because you know there were the regional distributors of tapes. There isn't that so much now. What you have is the boutique labels still working in physical media, but that's a lot less than there was back then.
How long after that did Exploited come to fruition when you and Carl put that together? So pretty much you're doing rare genre films on VHS at that time. Was that much long after? Did you go to uni first and then Exploited came after
I
that?
went to uni first, and then in Boston, and then came back to England. Was working for Andrew again at VPM, but it was then called the Video Corporation, and Exploited started while I was working for Andrew. So I basically, we probably couldn't have started Exploited without me working for Andrew, because Andrew did all the duplication and gave me a special rate on duplication that was affordable. He also, you know, taught me where you get the covers printed and where you get the stickers printed.
Mm.
He had all that knowledge, you know, and so he was, you know, and I could ship out of his office and that kind of thing as well. So he was essential to that. That's when Exploited started, I think, in like 98 or 99. Um, but yeah, that was when I started actually buying rights, because Andrew had taught me that a lot of the stuff that was coming out after the Video Recordings Act wasn't actually licensed. They were basically
Right.
licensors, but the masters were doing the rounds. So people were just duplicating the shit out of these masters and putting new covers on them and retitling the films and just, you know, filling the bargain bins up and down the country.
So we've Exploited, you learn about the buying the rights. What other lessons do you and Carl learn from Exploited that you still use today in Severin?
not to run such a business in England.
Hmm.
Basically, it was a road to failure, because basically, if you want to do a boutique label in England, certainly at that time, and concentrate on horror films, they were all going to be censored. A lot of them were going to be censored. So basically, it was pointless, because if you want to do the definitive edition of something, what's the use if the gory bits are cut out? So that was, I couldn't wait to get out of England. I couldn't wait to get out of England anyway, because of because my passion was in these kinds of movies. Obviously, now I realize there are much more serious issues in the world to devote your life to. But basically, for me, that was what I was the most passionate about, and just not being able to see it just was so frustrating. Not being able to see these movies, like a new Dario Argento movie would come out, and invariably it would be cut,
Mm.
and what's the point? um so but it also taught you a lot of kind of sobering lessons about, even if a film looks like it should be in demand, doesn't necessarily translate to thousands of sales. No, it can go very, very slowly, and marketing to the right people, and showing up at conventions, the very few that there were in England at the time. We would do that in order just so people knew who we were and what we were doing. But the other
Mm.
thing that we started at Exploited was doing the interviews, which would be extras at the end of the VHS tape. So basically, if I had the release of Death Dream, for example, I went out to LA and filmed an interview with Alan Ormsby that ended up being an extra after the movie on the tape. So we were I was obsessed still with the idea of the filmmaking process and interviewing filmmakers about that. And I wasn't interested so much in the big movies, in the Star Warses and the Superman and stuff like that, which are the ones that would have a whole unit to create a documentary about the making of such and such a film. I
Yeah.
wanted to hear from exploitation filmmakers and low budget filmmakers. So to actually go out, interview people about how they threw a certain film together was fascinating to me, and was not that common back then.
When you move to Anchor Bay and you start working on special features and documentaries and the stuff you're talking about just then, that was pretty much a time where you were kind of developing filmmaking chops, right? Because it wasn't just about sit down, interview, playing kind of thing. At this point in your time of your life, I imagine that you were kind of like looking into the craft of documentaries as well, and
Yeah.
especially regards to documentaries about movies, which nowadays documentaries about movies, and you are so great at putting your ones together. I'm such a big fan of movies like The Clones of Bruce. I watched it again last night because I just absolutely love that film. But back then, a lot of the stuff wasn't really coming out on its own. These would be like special feature stuff, be like an hour documentary on disc number two on the DVDs, which I miss very much, and some of the stuff which I love that you guys do at Severin, you still have that going. What do you learn about that process though? Do you start developing your own style? Do you start developing your own kind of I don't know, filmmaking senses when it comes to putting those type of things together so you can make it like a David Gregory film special documentary as opposed to just the plain old thing that everyone else was doing at that time?
Well, I don't. There weren't many people doing it at that time. That was the thing. I was lucky that I met Bill Lustig during that period when we were doing Exploited, and also when I was making Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Shocking Truth was the first kind of long form one that I did. And it was thanks to that I realized that there was, an it sounds too pretentious to say there's an art to it, but there is
Yeah,
there
of
is a
course.
craft to actually telling these stories, right? Telling the behind the scenes story. And I'd already done two documentaries which had been released in Nottingham, where VPM was, where Nottingham at War and Nottingham at the Cinema, which were basically local interest videos. But still, I had to go out and get several interviews with elderly people, and tell a story from beginning to end and accompany it with images, you know. So I really kind of learnt that at Andrew's place as well. But I studied film, and I did a thesis film called Scathed, and I'd been doing, you know, short films and stuff like that. So the idea was to become a narrative filmmaker. And so having a storytelling awareness of storytelling was something that I was already trying, a skill that I was already trying to hone. But Texas Chainsaw: The Shocking Truth was a fortunate one to actually start as a long form filmmaking documentary, just because it was such a good story. It was like
Mm.
there were so many great behind the scenes stories,
Yeah.
which not the case on all movies. I was kind of spoiled on that. You know, I basically, not only does it have all these great stories, it had all these people who were willing to tell those stories, and they were not jaded by telling those stories because they hadn't told them that much. They certainly hadn't told them that much on camera, you know. So I was able to get like really honest first person interviews in order to tell that and put that together very cheaply, you know. And that was kind of a standalone documentary, and it was because of that that Lustig hired me to do The Wicker Man, which was for an extra for the Anchor Bay release, and another one that had a great behind the scenes story. But that ended up being like a 30-minute piece on the disc as opposed to something feature length. But that was when Lustig was really impressed with how that one came out. And so it was then when I was like, okay, I've got to keep up this level of storytelling in the stuff that we're doing, because Lustig said, why don't you stay and do all the extras
Oh, awesome.
for the Anchor Bay releases, which was like a dream, because he then gave me, you know, the list of films that they had under license, which would more and more stuff would be coming in each day. And so it would be like, okay, well, we've got 20 Italian films coming up. I'm going to go to Rome and interview all of these people and put it together. And a lot of them in my, you know, ridiculously long IMDb are just like single person interviews. But
Mm.
even with a single person interview, what I had realized later is that not everybody can do it. Like, it's very frustrating to me when somebody says they're an editor and I give them the interview and they're not able to put it together in a way that's like, you know, telling the story in a chronological fashion, or in a fashion that makes sense, you know. Like, surely the release of the film should come after the production of the film, that sort of
Mm.
thing. That's pretty obvious to me.
Yes.
But it's the same with like choosing the clips to accompany what's being said, or finding the photos that should go with it. I mean, back then, not many people were not only were they not taking video on set, they were not taking behind the scenes photos on a lot of low budget movies. So you have to make do with what you can. So very early on, I had to, but Bill was the one who kind of pushed me to make sure that all of these were um, delivery ready, basically. Like, he would come in and he'd watch them and then he'd give notes. You know, there were certain things that he was not, and he wasn't always the, you know, the kindest person about certain things. If he didn't like
Mm.
something, he would say it, you know. And that was good for me, because I had to make sure that it was ready to deliver, in my opinion, before I showed it to him and he gave it the final sign off. So I think that's why I was able to at least, you know, at least make them as good as I could make them, you know?
As yourself, you know, co-founder of Severin, and you got this company, and you're doing great work there. When you look back at the kind of the mentorship, or the working with people like Andrew and Bill, how much of their um leadership, how much of their kind of like their feedback, whether it was like, you know, like you said before, like Bill was sometimes like very to the point kind of stuff like that. How much of that have you developed into your own style when it comes to you talking to your own employees or your own editors, etc., moving forward? Because I'm of the belief that the more you surround yourself with people of experience, the more you talk to people experience, the more that you yourself kind of like take that into your own stuff and you develop your own style, but you're learning from the experiences, whether it be mistakes or celebrations or what have you. And it's only going to make you better moving forward as well. It's a very much like an evolutionary kind of thing there that's happening. Is that something, is how you kind of foresee it as well? See it as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I love finding people that do good work. I wish there were more of them. But like I say, there's a lot of people who have the desire to do this stuff and aren't as good as it at it as others, So when you do find somebody who is not only good at it, but also really keen to do it right, really into the subject, those are the people that you want to keep. And so I think the majority of the people at Severin now definitely fall into that category. And when you do find somebody who, has those skills and certainly is wants to hone those skills and make them better, they're people that you want along with you for the rides. And I certainly hope that I am similar to how Andrew and Bill were with me, because basically they saw something in me that like I wanted to do more. I wanted to be making stuff and putting stuff out and doing it better than anybody else could. So, whether or not I had succeeded in that is another matter. But the fact is I definitely look for that in people who come and work for Severin.
Just want to
Whether
move on.
people who are actually here full time or just the many, many collaborators we have around the world. There's plenty of them. It's not like a rarity, but it is rarer than you would think. Just having the desire does not necessarily mean you can do it.
Just want to move on to this other game I like to play. It's called Rapid Fire Questions. I'm going to throw some questions to you. First thing comes to mind, just let me know. If you want to elaborate on it, we can. You have made lots of documentaries about horror movies. Is there a documentary on a horror movie you've seen that isn't your own that you are a big fan of?
Of recent ones, I would say Hodorowski's Dune is the real standout. I mean, it's not really a making of because the movie never actually got made, but it was, about something that was prepped but never actually went before the cameras. And I think that documentary, with Hodorowski being kind of the host of the documentary, that's probably the one that I've revisited, more than once, of all the kind of filmmaking documentaries that have been made in recent years. And Hodorowski's just such a brilliant storyteller, as I found when I made the Santa Sangre making of. But yeah, just his Dune. I mean, you can just imagine what an incredible film it was, which is really credit to the filmmakers and him as a storyteller to kind of pull that off. But I also would like to kind of just mention that, back when I started doing these, there were relatively very few making ofs of genre movies. I mean, Star Wars and things like that had their own making ofs, mainly big budget films, but there weren't really any on films or filmmakers from the low budget world, which is hard to imagine now because we have seemingly thousands of them. Many that I've that I've made, but several other people have made as well. And Document of the Dead was kind of one of the pioneers there. The fact that Roy Frumkes took his students to the making of Dawn of the Dead was just very fortuitous. The fact that we actually got to see on-set footage of the making of Dawn of the Dead was amazing. It's a bit dated now because there are so many Dawn of the Dead making ofs as well now, but to actually have been on the set and see that footage is amazing. But I think the one that made the biggest impression on me personally, like the pioneering show, was called the Incredibly Strange Film Show, which was a Jonathan Ross hosted show from the late 80s, and it had 2 seasons of 6 and then kind of a sort of follow-up called For One Night Only. But the very first episode was on John Waters, and that was just mind-blowing to me. There was nothing like it at the time, documentaries about a filmmaker like that. And then they did Ray Dennis Steckler, Herschel Gordon Lewis, Ted V. Mickles, and Russ Meyer in the first season. But it was the John Waters one where I really took something away from it, where I was like, wow, that's the kind of filmmaker I want to be, first of all, with your sort of friends and like-minded people going out and just making stuff. But just it really kind of opened my eyes to the fact that those kinds of movies out there, like psychotronic movies, I suppose is a better word than horror movies. But you know, I just after that I just became obsessed with John Waters and how he was able to actually make these kinds of movies for little or no money. And so I got Shock Value, his book, and every other book he'd written, and all of his films, and all the books about him, and all that kind of thing. But that show was really quite something because there was nothing like that about those kinds of filmmakers at the time.
And it might be a challenge for this one for you, considering the titles that you have behind you right now. What's the goriest movie you've ever seen?
I mean, it's probably Brain Dead, the Peter Jackson movie, just because that's got the most blood out of any movie ever, I think. So, you know, I mean, if that's what you mean with the most gore in it, that's in there, it's probably Brain Dead.
Um, is there a movie that you would love to get your hands on and restore and release through Severin that you haven't been able to do yet? Is one of those come up in your life yet?
Same answer, I guess. I mean, we all want to do those early Peter Jackson movies, but they're being held prisoner by Peter Jackson. So we'll see if it ever happens. But if it does, it's unlikely to be a company like ours. I'm sure he'll go with Sony or somebody massive.
Last one here, and it'll be interesting to know your answer since you've been in the US for so long. Pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
Yes.
Oh, I had a couple yeses lately. Usually the answer is no, and that is the correct answer, no. But some people have said yes lately, so I'm not being swayed. But the balance is it's
Yeah.
kind of it's right now it's around. I'd say
I
maybe a
love
month ago it was 80-20.
Hawaiian pizza. It's my second favorite after pepperoni and mushroom.
Do you like just the pineapple on its own? Because I know some people say they don't only want the pineapple, they want the olives and like all the other stuff on there as well. They want like a loaded kind of pizza experience.
Oh no, it has to be a Hawaiian. I don't think it could just be like an everything pizza. That sounds a bit grim to me.
Just stupid question I'm going to ask here. What's a pizza situation like in the UK? Is it how's over there? Because you've been in the US, I'm sure you're spoiled choice, especially in LA, we get some good slices. And if you go to New
Well,
York and
you'd be
offices there.
surprised. We're often trying to find a better pizza place in LA. I've just come back from. I go to France quite often because that's where my mum lives,
Hmm.
and they have amazing pizza in the south of France. They do not have anything close to that here in Los Angeles,
Hmm.
uh, and I would argue they don't in New York either. I'm sorry, New
Oh,
York. It's really kind of what you grow up with, isn't it? The kind of pizza that you like, because
yeah.
Chicago love Chicago pizza. Bostonians love Boston pizza. But for me, it's the pizza in the south of France, because that part of the south of France actually used to be Italy. So I think
Hmm.
that's probably why there's such an Italian influence. But I actually
Right.
have better pizza in the south of France than I do even in Italy.
Awesome. That sounds great.
Whereas
Great,
England,
great
when
thing
I
to
was
learn.
growing up, I was quite satisfied with the Perfect Pizza was a place that we used to order from regularly. There was a place called Darwood's near my house, which I thought this pizza was amazing, but I bet if I was to have it now, I'd think it was rubbish.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Amazon Prime Video. One of the best on-demand streaming services available, Amazon Prime Video features exclusive Amazon originals as well as popular movies and TV shows. Watch Amazon Prime Video anytime, anywhere. I want to go to the home stretch now. I want to talk about Severin. So 2006, yourself and Carl, a few other people put Severin together. So Exploited, you tried this before we Exploited, didn't work. Now you got Severin, and now you got another kind of ball game as well. Because not only do you have all this experience behind you, but there's changing technologies happening, and slowly streaming starts coming into fruition, and DVD and stuff starts going on the wayside. How you still manage to stay afloat and still be so incredibly popular, relevant, vital during these kind of really streaming heavy times? Because I know for myself, I try to get physical media as much as I can. I know that it has become more of a niche than ever before. What's the kind of like the lessons, the tricks, the philosophies that you've kind of put into it with Severin from 2006 to now, especially with the whole streaming aspect of it all?
Well, we do get streaming rights on the movies that we license as well for the most part. So there is a certain amount of streaming income that we get. But it hasn't come close to replacing physical sales. So yeah, so basically we balance both, but putting together I understand why the business has gone in that direction, because to put together a special edition disc is so much work compared
Mm.
to just delivering the movie to a streaming platform or to an aggregator who delivers it to several streaming platforms. It's just night and day. It's like that's. But the other side of that is streaming, to actually get a place in on a streaming platform where you will actually be found without somebody actually typing in the title of your film is
Mhm.
pretty competitive now. Like, if you think about the video shop back in the day, you would go in and you could actually look around and you could browse in a way that you could see a lot of stuff in a very short time. Whereas browsing on a streaming platform, you're just clicking and you get very bored of clicking very quickly, and you're like, there's nothing. There's that's it. Let's go back to the top and we'll pick that one, and that's that. So I think that's probably a threat to independent film and to library films in general for the future. But as of right now, there's enough people buying physical media that it's fine for us for the time being. I wouldn't say it's plain sailing. We're not, it's not. I'm not ready to retire to my mansion in the Bahamas or whatever, because it's still there's still a lot of investing in every single release we have. So while we have enough of a library now that lots of money's coming in every month, it all goes straight out again to work on the next lot.
It's interesting here in Australia. I think in the last year before, it could be the case in UK and the US as well, where when it comes to music, vinyl sales
Yeah.
outsells, say, CD by like 2 to 1 now. Like vinyl has become kind of like the what to the new generation what it was to generations like 30, 40 years ago. Do you foresee, and my hope is that this will happen, do you foresee that DVD, Blu-ray would maybe come back in a big way, kind of like vinyl is? Do you think that the streaming platforms, because there's so many of them, and the amount of money spent on all these subscriptions as such will just be too much for people, and maybe the physical media aspect of stuff might come back again?
Um, Yes, but if you think about it, they're more like DVDs are more like CDs. They're basically, people don't really collect CDs anymore, and DVDs is definitely considered outdated. Like the Blu-ray and now 4K UHD are definitely considered the optimal way to actually see a film if you're obsessed with seeing the best possible version, as you should be if you're a film fan. But the other thing is that the one thing that we can rely on is that cineasts and film fans, and particularly genre film fans, they love an actual collection. They love physical things, so you
Yeah.
can actually see your library around you, just as my office is here with my VHSs. People like to actually have that accessible to them, so that's one good thing. But the other thing is the packed special edition. It's basically the streaming does not seem to be in any hurry to adopt extras.
Yeah.
And in some ways, they're not really that bothered about having the optimal presentation either. A lot of
Yeah.
that stuff is compressed that you're seeing on streaming. So basically, you may as well watch it SD rather than HD, and certainly not UHD. Because a lot of it is already compressed. So basically, the best possible way to see your favorite movie is on the 4K UHD, packed with extras and beautiful packaging, and that's kind of what we rely on, and that's what we love, and therefore we want to make the additions that we would like of any given movie that we tackle.
And going back to like a pivotal theme, well, we were speaking beforehand in regard to censorship. The censorship these days, where before it was governmental, now it's corporate censorship. And what I
Yeah.
mean by that is Gene Hackman just passed away, for example. I want to watch The French Connection. I got a double disc DVD of French Connection I bought when distributed by 20th Century Fox back like 20 years ago. I can watch that, but if someone else is going to watch the same movie on Disney Plus, it will be different because they changed words in that. They seem offensive. They're taking out things. And that's something that people tend to need to know as well, is that the product that you're getting, especially classic movies, there's going to be a good chance that maybe lines will be changed. The use of AI might hide some nudity. Splash, for example, Daryl Hannah's buttocks were there. They used it, made her hair go longer. It's something that's out there, and I think a lot of people need to know more about it because it's to me it's very creepy, and not only creepy but invasive towards the filmmakers themselves. I think it's a very kind of poor taste for people to do that whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that filmmakers go back and change their movies is it's annoying because
Yeah,
basically they as time goes on, you look back on a film that you made and you're like, I wish I'd have done that differently, right?
yeah,
Whereas, and so we have to argue sometimes with filmmakers who want to like fix something that they didn't like first time round, that that's not really acceptable. It has to be the movie that people knew, unless you're adding something that was censored, then you can go back and change it. But even then, maybe you want to put in the theatrical version as well, just to be sure. What we tend not to do here is include a version that was basically a cut down for censorship.
right.
An alternate version which has like the clothed scenes, maybe we put both versions on, or maybe we put the clothed scenes as an extra. It just really kind of depends. But yeah, filmmakers wanting to go back and fix the problems, that's George Lucas is obviously the biggest offender of this, and
Yeah,
uh and and it's pretty famous that nobody's happy about the work that he
no,
did.
yeah.
Not one person is like, yep, that's better than how it
Mm.
was originally. Maybe George Lucas himself. But the classic example was E.T. with Spielberg going back and
The
making
walkie-talkies, yeah,
talkies instead of guns. And
yeah.
I rather liked E.T. when I was a youth. I saw it on opening night with my dad in England, and I remember that bit like giving me shivers down my spine, because I'm like, oh my God, they're gonna shoot ET, and when I saw it without that, the film was ruined. And
Mm.
basically I have not been back to watch it since, because that's at the end of the film, and I'm not going to go the whole way through the film to find that it's that version. I don't know how to figure it out if it's that version otherwise, and I certainly aren't going to fast forward it to make sure that's in there and then go back, because I want to see it as it lands in the movie. um anyway, that's a bit of a segue, but basically our thing is that yes, we want to try and present the film as the filmmaker intended it back then. So that might include adding. I'll give you an example. The most recent versions of Deranged that have been out since the 90s, including the one we put out from Exploited, have that bit in it where he scoops the eyeballs out
Right.
of the table. And Alan Ormsby and Jeff Gillen, the co-directors, they took it out because they thought it looked like shit. They were
Mm.
like, this effect does not work. So they actually took it out for that reason. But it got put back in by the producer, and now it's in every version, even though it's not director approved. And I'm not sure that that's right, honestly. But
Mm.
it is a gory bit. And horror fans, particularly splatter fans, we'll take every gory bit we can. So now that's just a part of it, even though it's against the wishes of the filmmaker.
Well, you guys are doing great work there over at Severin. And for everyone out there, I really recommend severinfilms.com. That's Severin films.com. Go there, check out everything they have on sale over there. You've got the whole catalog. There's events coming up, all sorts of stuff over there. I really recommend people check it out because it's really great titles. Maybe titles that you've been looking for and you didn't think were available. Have a look and you'll probably see that it is. And I just want to say, look, David, congratulations to you and to your everyone over at Severin for all the great work you're doing. And also it's just so great to be able to talk to someone who, ever since a young age of, watching King Kong 1976 version and keeping that passion of watching that film and learning the business acumen and everything else that comes with it. And here you are, you fought the good fight, you're winning the battles, and here you are with Severin. And I just want to say congrats to that and thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content.